we have to completely rethink the whole model. And I thought to myself, if I could only get a chance to get hold of what that is, and then Roma appeared, or vice versa, and there it was. It seemed to me she's not just the great mother personified, instinctive behavior. There's no question that when she moves in the most important scene, in the striding movement, that's surely agency. She certainly has her own initiative and will, and she's not just acting out maternal instinct. It's a consciousness, as Mike Redding said, it's quite objective in a way that the matriarchal is not supposed to be if you think of the matriarchal as just a mother complex. It wasn't a complex. And then that she could not only rescue the children, but have that level of insight that she didn't want her own child, her own girl child, to be born. So there is the consciousness. The matriarchal consciousness is precisely what this culture keeps arguing about with abortion and other things. I mean, real matriarchal consciousness chooses what it wants to support and what it doesn't want to support. And for me, the payoff of what makes it particularly consciousness, when I try to assess consciousness, and it's turned out to be a life's work for me to try to understand consciousness, anybody can tell you about their self-experience, and we all do. And everybody goes to analysis and talks about their self-experience. We have to. But simply getting our sad story out and the latest history of insult is not exactly consciousness. It's downloading, it's offloading, but it should be going somewhere. And where it should be going is beyond self to a capacity to deal with otherness. So when I see myself or anyone else get there, then I'll speak of consciousness. If I can only hear the endless round of me and I and myself, I see the value of it, and I don't despise it, but it isn't consciousness yet. But clearly Cleo achieves the connection to the other. And I wanted to quote something that I found, because how this man made this movie, I have no idea. I mean, he's farther along than any man I've encountered yet, and much farther. I mean, but they did put out a big coffee table book called Roma that I did buy on eBay, because it was thanks to Francis told me to get it there, and I got it for a good price. But it has an absolutely lovely essay by some of you may know this writer. She's a contemporary Mexican writer. She was born in Mexico. She grew up in South Africa, and she lives in New York City now. She's a novelist, and her name is Valeria Luiselli, and she is really an amazing writer. And in a couple of pages, she says some extraordinary things. But the paragraph I'd just like to quote, every paragraph of her 2 or 3 page essay is just right on, and perhaps we should find a way of circulating it. But I'm just going to give you one paragraph because it gets to that amazing ending. Because the ending is very, very important, and it's that ending that goes up to the rooftop. And she nails the rooftop. Those rooftops are named azoteas in Mexico City, and they're actually quite famous, it turns out. So just listen to this, because I think it speaks for what I mean by the span of Cleo's individuation and her capacity for consciousness, which I think is the payoff of matriarchal consciousness. And as I say, it could save us all. The film begins with an image of the ground, a patio where Cleo, the protagonist and beating heart of the story, cleans and sweeps an archipelago of dog shit every day. The eye of the camera makes its way around a house, upstairs, downstairs, the dining table and the kitchen, then in and out of the house. The city sidewalks, its buzzing streets, in and out of hospitals, cinemas, and hotel rooms, then out into the periphery of the city, then further out into the countryside, and even further out into the geographical limits of the country. In the western coastline of the Gulf of Mexico, its tides pulling and waters churning. Finally, the eye returns to the patio, where Cleo cleans, its own waters churning before slipping into the drain, and then pans up toward the azotea, or rooftop, a shot reminiscent of Weston's or Modati's or Bukashi's photos of Mexican rooftops. Azoteas are a signature heterotropic or other space of Mexico's city life. Elevated and enclosed by a parapet wall, there are spaces that are both inside and outside, both visible and invisible, and they are where the rebirth of everydayness takes place. Cleaning, washing, line drying, but also loitering, voyeuring, transgressing norms, breaking moral and aesthetic codes. The visual and narrative art, a 180-degree revolution from patio to azotea, leaves us staring into a wide open sky. And I think that really is the prospect of matriarchal consciousness. It's a really scanning attentiveness that doesn't leave anything out by focusing on just that piece that is personally annoying, but never fails to include all of that or deny any of that, but gets beyond it into an attitude of infinite caring.
Would you say connection to the divine, going up to the top?
Well, it's all divine in my view. It depends how, if in a patriarchal sense, I guess, if God is in heaven, but yes, it's divine, but it's a divining more than it is a just one divinity. To me, it's objective in that sense of the divine, and it's knowing, but it doesn't leave out the bottom in favor of the top, which is sometimes what transcendentalism gets us into. It isn't transcendentalism, it isn't Emerson, it's something who I love, but it isn't Emerson, it's something else. But it's a span of consciousness. I wouldn't name it, I just would say I would say that the consciousness is in the human being, and it's a consciousness that includes the all. But it's human consciousness.
It does seem in the film that there's so many moments when her reaction to what's happening is such acceptance. Yes. The acceptance, to see what is and then accept what is. Yeah. It's not demonstrative in any way, but it's over and over again in little ways. It seems like she sees what is and she accepts it. And the beginning image where you see the water and then the plane is just an illusion, in the water. It's that's what the whole thing is. It's grounded. It's grounded.
Well, I think matriarchal is not hierarchical, and that's the thing I'm resisting. It's just simply not hierarchical, and that's the thing that makes her so amazing.
One of the visual puns was the amount of dog shit.
Oh, yeah.
It was not possible for one dog to shit down by another. But I also think that's also I'm thinking, well, why did you do that? Well, it's very much of a mother role, You're cleaning up shit all the time.
Well, the dog is somewhere an avatar of the shitty father. I mean, he's a really bad father. I mean, he's really, as a man, he's about as annoying as they come. I mean, he's so terrible. He doesn't send them any money. He lies. The worst is when he pretends that he can't get into the maternity room because the other doctor won't let him in, and she says, "You can come in if you want." So I have an appointment.
Right.
What a horrible man. And also, Adam was talking to me. He takes the bookshelves, but he doesn't take the books. I mean, he's a shell of logos. So, in a sense, the dog is acting out the mess he leaves for everyone else to clean up.
But don't you think that's linked to the picture over and over again of the car trying to get into the space of the...
Ridiculous.
And he runs over the dog shit. He
ridiculous.
runs over the
Of course.
dog shit, and then he complains about it later.
And then complains.
Yeah.
Right. And then the thing about the books, what was great about that acceptance is that after a while they get in, like, well, this looks so different. Well, I kind of like it. You know?
Well, I have to say about the dog food.
What?
I think that food came from the props department. There's no way that dog that size.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That was way more than one dog was food in one day.
There is some limits there, as far as I'm concerned.
But I do think the theme of the movie is, what are we going to do when the father has failed us? And I think that's exactly where we are as a culture. If the father has failed us, what do we have? And we have quite a great deal to draw upon. We're not stuck in the English language or Scandinavian song. I mean, it isn't just the twilight of the idols and that's the end of it. There is another way out. And Cleo points that way.
Maybe we could say that she was an image of relationship. It was
Yes,
all about relating.
yes.
And maybe that's part of what we need in this world, is to talk and relate, and when it's possible, of course.
Well, look at the level of her empathy. For me, that scene also that someone else mentioned, where she lies down with a little boy who's already tried to kill his brother. The brother won't let him kill him and tells him what a sissy he is. And then he shoots at Cleo, and she doesn't directly react, except that she comes and lies down with him. And then he says, "What are you doing?" And finally she says, she basically says, "I'm dead. I can't talk to you. I'm dead." In other words, she's empathic enough to let herself die. And she says, "I like being dead." Now, one of the big essays analysts read these days is one by Andre Green called "The Dead Mother." And the dead mother is something that patients get to a lot of times when the mother is literally dead to their experience. Paradoxically, the mother who's not afraid to die with and for her child is not a dead mother. She's absolutely alive. And so there you get a sense of something Egyptian, a resurrection almost. It's just fantastic sense of a resurrecting consciousness that's not afraid of death. You see, it's just as she could get beyond the death of her own child. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a very astonishing moment.
It seemed like that when she rescued the children, that put her so close to death, that whole notion of the valuing of the children, and yet the confession that she really didn't want that baby.
But I have to say, I don't know that that's not just the first layer.
No.
Because if she had had a chance to grieve that baby, I think that truth might have been.
That truth might have
And
been.
it could be that she didn't want it. But maybe they didn't let her even connect with it.
I think it may have been both at once. I mean, I showed that moment, and like I said, speaking the truth, it wasn't the truth because I wasn't sure. And I think it may have felt like the truth and felt like not being the truth at the same time. I agree with you, because another thing I showed when we were talking in care was just how fast that whole process in hospital was. Have the baby, take it away again. No time at all.
That was appalling. It's absolutely excruciating to watch.
But the way it was filmed with the personal in front of you and just behind you, the hospital
That's
procedures
right.
going on so quickly, that was an amazing.
But they let her hold the baby, you know, they let her fondle the baby, I think. And then they took, and then they're wrapping, and then again, the thing in the background where that little corpse is just laying there.
It felt to me that they did the right thing by letting her hold it, but for about 10 seconds.
Right.
No, I
Not long enough for you, huh?
well, I think not for any of us. It was horrible, but
But wasn't the hospital in kind of crisis because all
Yes.
the people were coming?
Well-
I didn't quite understand what that big, yeah.
where I guess I don't go, though, is I don't believe that insights emerge because we're well held. Most of my insights have come when I was not well held, not when I was well held. I prefer to hold people, and I have held people as they get insights, but I guess I really did accept that she had an insight. And I wasn't sure, it was an insight, and it was also an owning. I think you said that word, owning, that she had, it was sort of an unthought known that she could verbalize at that point. That's how I took it. But I realized that you can take it more than one way.
The other thing that struck me about that is, I'm not sure I would want to bring a girl child into that world either.
She didn't say she didn't want the child. She said she didn't want her to be born, and that fits your idea. The line was, I didn't want her, but she was not. She finished the thought. She repeated it. I didn't want her to be born, and I think you're onto something there. But she also, that was hers. That was her feeling. That was what she felt.
She never told anybody that her lover was the fascist that confronted them with their gun. She never mentioned it.
There was an image of patriarchal unconsciousness in the film in the form of Furman, and never more than when he comes in as one of the people shooting the students, and you look at him coming in, and he's absolutely mindless. I mean, there is no consciousness whatsoever. It's a very shocking image. He comes in just as they picked the baby, the crib, and he doesn't see anything. But she sees everything, and he sees nothing. It's just unbelievable.
That problem is kind of carried in the party scene where they're at Christmas at that estate, by the song from Jesus Christ Superstar playing, I Don't Know How to Love Him, which I think is Mary Magdalene's song about loving Jesus, and the idea that the woman has to somehow conform herself to the man's, expectations and needs, and it's just about impossible. And that was certainly her experience.
Don't finish your lunch, come on, don't want to miss the previews.
What do you think about all the gun shooting at that party? That was strange.
Well, they were horrors. That whole family was dreadful.
I love that the gun practice was over a swamp. So you saw all these people practicing gun shooting with children, and then there's a swamp. So it's very, another kind of divided image.
Adam, you shared something from that scene where the little boy goes in that area.
The little boy, I think it's Pepe, is climbing the hill, and towards the top of the hill is a perfectly circular pond, but it's choked with mud and junk. You feel like it was maybe once a man-made, beautiful, pond. So it's like if you think of water as an image of consciousness, it's just foul, can't be accessed, and then comes the shooting scene.
And the guy says your wife is going to become a rebel. And he says, no, I'll whack her before that happens.
You said something earlier, I think in your introduction, about that matriarchal consciousness doesn't need to be rescued. We need to be rescued by matriarchal consciousness.
I did say that, yes.
Could you say more about that, or would you speak up so I can hear you, because I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Well, I'm talking as loud as I can. Is this working? Is there any way I can have a microphone?
Yeah.
That would make the difference to her. Okay, I thought it might help to read a few lines from Neumann, since he's the one who actually opened the door to this terminology, which has not been picked up for the most part by analytical psychology. In contrast to the activity of the head ego, the preferred attitude of an observing consciousness at the matriarchal level also corresponds to the muted activity of the ego. Here it is a question more of an attentive perceiving than of an intentional thinking or judging activity of consciousness. The observing matriarchal consciousness is to be confused neither with the sensation function of masculine ego consciousness, nor with the distance of masculine consciousness that leads to science and objectivity. The observing matriarchal consciousness is guided by concomitant feelings based on half-conscious processes and accompanying intuitions, with the help of which the ego orients itself in the presence of strong emotional tendencies. Matriarchal consciousness reflects the unconscious processes, summarizes them, and directs them inward. That is, it assumes a stance of waiting for, without deliberate ego intentions. For matriarchal consciousness is a question of a kind of total perception in which the entire psyche participates and in which the ego has more the task of the directing the libido toward the observed life processes or events and intensifying them than that of abstracting from them and hence arriving at an extension of consciousness. Typical for this observing consciousness is the act of contemplation, where energies are guided toward a content, process, or midpoint, where the ego establishes a participation with the emotionally colored content and lets it impregnate and permeate it. This differs from the extremely patriarchal consciousness that distances and abstracts itself from the content. And now I think that perfectly conveys not only Cleo, but the filmmaker and the film as a whole. This is the reason this kind of filmmaking is so difficult, is that most cinema that people see involves identification. You get a character and you identify with them. Like if you see the film about Winston Churchill, you identify with what it must have been like to come to power at just that point. Or any number of movies by Meryl Streep in which you identify with the kind of woman she is in that movie. But this kind of movie forces us to contemplate just as much as Cleo is doing and not get what's going on. I mean, the first time I saw the film, I didn't even realize what was going on. I thought he was going to Toronto, just like the kids. I wasn't following that maybe some of you knew immediately that the family was dysfunctional and he was lying. I thought the mother was acting kind of neurotic. I didn't know, where I didn't realize that, of course, she knew or sensed that he was having an affair. In other words, Cleo just has to keep watching, and so do we. And you watch, you care, you have emotions, but you don't automatically know what's going. You're not setting up an hypothesis and testing it against further evidence. You're just taking it all in. And then the interesting thing is, look at what Coron, Cleo, and all of us do with it. Something emerges. You actually end up with what you didn't have when you started. Now, how many films give you that? Instead, they just guide your thinking, guide your feeling, motivate the characters. You stand in awe of the production and the design and so forth. But it's all wrapped up and sewed up. You haven't had to do a bit of work. You haven't done any, you haven't grown, and you feel better, but it's like a passive hit of somebody else's consciousness. It's not yours. This movie actually changes your mind. I mean, when I saw the baby die and then the children were at sea, I thought, given that he's already let a baby die, I guess Claire's going to lose them too. I mean, how far does this go? I mean, I knew he was capable. That was pretty brutal to take her into and to have to watch her see the baby born dead. I mean, I don't remember that in any other movie. So, you know, so you got to be so grateful for life itself in this by the time you finished this movie, which I think is quite a remarkable state of mind to achieve. That's what I'm getting at. It's a consciousness, but it's not a consciousness that comes out of an abstraction.
That author again.
Erich Neumann, the man who Jung felt and many others felt in the 50s, did more than any other analytical psychologist to advance analytical psychology, for which your club is named. He was the big second voice after Jung, because of the book The Origins and History of Consciousness, The Great Mother, and this is in a book called The Fear of the Feminine, and other essays on feminine psychology by Erich Neumann. He was an amazingly creative man. He died in Israel at the age of 55, but he was quite an achieved person, really quite something. And the correspondence he had with Jung has been published. Quite an amazing figure.
At one point, one of the children says, "Oh, you've gone mute." There are several references to that.
Say that again, please?
We can pass this around to
says to Cleo that she's gone mute.
Oh, she gone mute,
Yes.
yeah.
Which ties in with what Don was saying. Also, the way the camera moved, it was all, I really appreciated what you said about not focusing on one sort of hero or one element. The camera took in everything. It just sort of was always moving sideways, and you would see all the pots and pans, all of the pieces of the house, and then it would move outside. It was really a sort of democratic view of the world. You know, everything was included.
The danger is you really have to be a trained observer, and I often have to see movies several times because I'm not that good at picking. For instance, I didn't even see the man shot out of the cannon the first time, although everyone else seems to have, at the training ground. But but everything is sort of off to one side, and you could literally miss the most important thing. But I guarantee you, if you see it 3 or 4 times.
I missed that she was the only one able to do yoga.
Oh, yes. That's a hilarious moment. Well, she does it so naturally that you could just take it, you wouldn't even see it, except that she's young. It's a wonderful moment.
I missed it, what was it?
When she assumes the yoga pose that's supposed to be so difficult, maybe it is, but she had no difficulty.
And he mentioned this other thing, one of the other things that was going on in the background was, did you, right at the beginning of the training camp, there's this guy that shot out of a cannon into a net. I was like, what is, that was so interesting, and there's a lot of just really bizarre imagery in the background.
Well, isn't that saying, among many other things, that patriarchy is a stunt? I mean, it really...
Oh,
That's true.
I mean, yeah.
Any comments about the last beach scene where the sun is centering on Cleo the whole time? It's behind her, it's going through her. The whole time the sun is on her.
The sun.
You mean the littlest boy? Oh, the S-U-N.
No, the sun in the sky. It's very low in the sky, and it's behind her coming
What
around.
scene are you talking about? What was
Beach
it?
scene.
Oh,
Well,
the
wouldn't
beach
that
scene.
be consciousness?
The sun would be consciousness.
Wouldn't that light? I mean, I don't think why does the sun have to belong to Louis XIV? I mean, why can't the sun be hers as well?
Yeah, it feels like she is the center of the sun. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the women in the group felt about the mother and the grandmother.
The grandmother was a very androgynous character, and very seemed otherworldly almost. The grandmother had some strange body language and didn't really seem to connect to the mother that much. And I kept wondering about the grandmother.
Well, she had tragic sense of life. She was almost the embodiment of the tragic sense of life. And the way she was crying when she was registering Cleo, she was almost like a chorus in a sense in the background, knowing that this was the ultimate knower of women's tragedies and knew that this was one more.
I loved how the mother found herself. You know, that she got rid of the Galaxy and got the right sized car to fit in the garage. She had studied in chemistry, but I forget she was gonna go work in
The publishing, yeah.
the publishing. That she really found herself, and that as a group, then that was gonna be headed, the women were the leaders in this group now, that they were gonna be okay.
Well, her kindness toward Cleo was a turning point because she was sort of living in a neurotic, patriarchal marriage, and you began to feel she was this kind of neurotic woman of our time.
She was a mess.
And then when she really extended herself to Cleo in Cleo's moment of need, and it was not an easy time for her. I felt my whole feeling changed. I agree. I still felt toward the end she was a little histrionic, being abandoned, and she was a little manic in recovery. I mean, I felt she still needed more Cleo, but she was definitely along her way, and that was really quite touching. Yeah.
I was struck by the whole image of the Ford Galaxy, which first was the masculine,
Oh, yes.
the triumphal father returning.
Oh, my gosh.
All he has to do is come home, and it's like,
And not scrape the car, and that's supposed to be an achievement.
When she comes back with the night she's drunk and it's decided.
and the car comes from, you know, the masculine, more
Of course.
powerful northern neighbor. And on a personal note, 1972 is about when my own parents got divorced. And and we had a Ford Galaxy. Only I was the one that scraped up the fender against the side of the garage. To me, her struggles with the car is like suddenly she has to run the household. And she can't run it like her father. She has to find her own voice.
She does.
And that's what my mother had to do. And that's what she learned to do.
Yeah. She's a wonderful actress, the one who played the mother.
Can I ask a Galaxy question? So you said that the other movies that he had been were Gravity. So there's the Galaxy, and then there was two astronauts floating in space.
Yeah.
At one point, was that a reference?
Well, that's from the movie. They say what movie that is. It's a movie that came out in 1969 or 70 called Marooned.
Oh, Maroon.
It had come out a year or two before, and it sort of brought up the shadow side of NASA and space exploration. To me, the little clip you got was that those guys were just lost in space. I mean, they really,
exactly.
and that seemed to me the ungroundedness of the masculine to me in this particular movie. In that other movie, it means something else. I mean, that movie that he did, Gravity, there's a different meaning to the man. But
I'm shocked that he did that. I didn't know he did that film, and I did not like that film, and I love this.
Was it the Gravity with Sandra Bullock? Sandra Bullock.
And George Clooney?
Yeah. He really, that was the same person?
same person. It is
Wow,
odd,
that's
isn't
so
it?
interesting.
I certainly didn't love that movie. I mean, I saw values in it, but I did not love that movie in the way I love this movie. Yeah.
Didn't he do The Hobbit too? Was he one who did The Hobbit?
I don't know the answer. I don't think so. I could be wrong. I thought that was all Peter Jackson, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
Well,
all talking about the astronauts, the two scenes where little boys go around in their astronaut suits, they look a little bit lost.
Well, remember, we're just after the moon landing, and so it's all over pop culture at that time. But yeah, the boys, the older boys seem really kind of moving rapidly out of Tao, I guess, if I could put it that way, we introduced that word. Whereas the little boy, who still remembers his past lives, is quite an interesting fellow.
The little boy represents the guy who did the movie.
Yes.
Say that again. The little boy represents the guy who did the movie. So it is interesting that he's remembering something about his past lives.
He remembers drowning just before his sister nearly drowned.
Yeah, right.
Definitely intuitive child.
I was just speak up for the mother too. I think that other than not having money, she was running the house the whole time. And because she did it in such a way, his relationship was of highest value, when the problems did come, she kept reassuring them, it'll be us, we'll be together, we'll support each other. And to me, the biggest difference is they didn't have an income.
That triangle they form on the beach when they all come together reminded me a lot. Did any of you see the movie Melancholia? Where at the end, when the other planet, it's a Lars von Trier film, and it's when the other planet is going to collide with the Earth and there's no hope. The three characters that are left, two women, I think, and a child, form a little tent. They become it's a little triangle, and they become a kind of human teepee. Again, the image of survival. It's very, very tough, very touching.
I was so relieved that the mother finally asked the children to help with the baggage. And after the beach scene, when they almost died, when they got home, she said, now don't pull that, get back here and help with the baggage. I thought, oh, that's advanced. That's some more conscious.
Yes, I feel. I certainly see what you all are saying about the mom and how she kind of came together. But I had a different reaction to her because I felt like when she told the kids Dad wouldn't be coming home, and the little boy was crying, I just felt like she had no real ability to reach out emotionally to those children. The little girl Sophia was pulling into Cleo, and the little boy was over there crying.
Well, that's why I said there was something manic in her resilience, because she was too up, and she wasn't willing to engage with how bad it was to lose Dad for him. I agree with you about that.
I felt they didn't get much love, that kind of embracing comfort, the comfort from their mom.
But they got it from Cleo.
They got it from Cleo.
Yeah.
Yeah, she kind of hired Cleo to provide money.
But wouldn't you say that there had to be in this movie a woman of our time who would like to be a better mother and doesn't find it that easy to be one? Otherwise, how real would it be? I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's, just as it isn't easy to be a father, it isn't easy to be a mother. And a lot of people don't even measure up at all to those roles. So I think that had to be in the movie, that she found it hard to be a mother.
I took comfort earlier in the conversation when we were actually identifying the way that she developed, because I related to the mother actually, and it wasn't a very comfortable thing to do, because I think in some of the particular roles I have in life at the moment, someone said to me when I was talking about my anxieties and I actually used the term demons in a sort of loose kind of way, but it encouraged me to say, no, think of them as your children. And actually you wake up in the morning full of concerns for that. And I really felt for the mother in that scene in the restaurant, trying to say, oh, it'll be an adventure, just trying to find a good thing to say, and falling so short. I think you're right. And yet we did see her develop and find that the deeper, I'm not sure, a deeper compassion or a more real way of expressing it later on.
The most frightening moment in the movie, in a way, was when the grandmother tries to stop the fight of the brothers, and one throws something very heavy at the other, and she says, "It's really dangerous. You could have killed him," and we become aware that one of them could have killed the other. And and they would not listen to her. She did not have the authority to stop them. That was quite an upsetting scene for me, at least, because I saw the potential for tragedy in that family.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting moments in the end of the film is that you could see the mother preparing to run her own life. So it was an uplifting moment for the mother, not a defeat at all. Finally, I'm running my own life. I've got rid of that war. He's gone away. Exciting time. A defining moment.
I was struck by the heroine. She was the mother, but or acted there, and the kids came and hung out her arms, but she didn't have to do anything. Like she didn't rush around and hug them all. She was just there being mother. I thought it was, not hard. If you're doing it right, it's not hard.
I want to hear something from you, Francis, also about just your reaction to the whole film, just from your angles, the spiritual in film.
Well, this is, I just found this to be an extraordinary film. I think this conversation about matriarchal consciousness is right on, and how Cleo was the mother to the kids and saved them in the end. The biological mother, more than the biological mother, she had an invitation. But I think that climactic scene on the beach when she brings the two kids back and one of the kids says, "Cleo saved us," and then the mother says, "We love you. Let's see, thank you, we love you." I think that was it. And with the sun behind us, that's consciousness, and all of them are hugging each other. I really think that's just a very extraordinary moment just that's an extraordinary moment of that image, that very specific scene.
It's interdependent, wouldn't you say that, Francis? I mean, there's a Buddhist aspect. It's interdependent.
Right, Cleo saved us, thank you, we love you so much. So I think there is, I think Cleo is like, when someone is drowning, you just jump in to save that person. It's that's a common image, of not thinking of yourself, the bodhisattva, who is here to save others for themselves, self-sacrificing, and then thank you, gratefulness, and then we love you so much. And then right at that moment, she says, I didn't really want the baby. So her own birth of consciousness and development at that point that was talked about earlier. So there's so much in that scene that I think is so powerful. I think the other aspect, of course, is that in that beach scene when she goes out to save the kids, just the sound of the water was just incredible. I did not turn up the volume in that film, as you can see, okay? I did not turn it up. I mean, the filmmaker intended it to be that way. And I saw this film at the Castro Theater, and certainly the volume was quite high and, very loud at that point. And I think that that was all very much intended, that sense of the transpersonal, that she was part of the water that was going out. You could see her head bobbing up and down, and you couldn't see her for a moment, and yet she was pursuing the kids, and the kids' heads were bobbing up and down. So that sense of unity there, but also chaos and a sense of threat to them. And so that rescue, again, she couldn't even swim, that was made several points earlier, I think is just remarkable, a sense of her love, ultimately her love for the kids, and the reciprocal love you. I think that's just an extraordinary moment. I just also want to make mention of some recollections here. The scene with the shooting, over the lake or something. That reminded me very much of Jean Renoir's film, The Rules of the Game, 1939, which takes place also in a manor in the countryside, and you have the upper class hunting rabbits or something. And there's the lower class, the servant class. And we saw that in, the celebration. They were dancing upstairs and they were dancing downstairs and so on. So how also in that scene of the beach scene, we had classes coming together. The whole, the class difference collapses there. I think that's a very important part of this film as well. And I think the scene with the cannon shot and the person doing the strongman aspect, I think that has reverberations of Fellini films. I think you can see that. And then the burning, the fires burning. That someone mentioned Days of Heaven. There was a fire in Days of Heaven by Terrence Malick that seemed to remind people of that. So perhaps those were little homages to these earlier films that was there. But you mentioned about water.
Yes.
I think the water is really important, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, the water at the very beginning. The water at the very beginning, and it was like little waves of water, wasn't it? And then how it built up to the end, water at the end, okay? And then the hail, the rain, water in all of these permutations, and there's the power of water, the cleansing nature of water, the threat of water, whatever, is very, there's a lot of, I haven't figured it out, but I think you're onto something there about water, for sure,
Something to add on that.
That was when the cup broke. I thought, this is a bad omen. When she was drinking that cup, I thought this is symbolic of the breaking. Something is broken here. Something is going to die or whatever.
And her water is going to break. Her water is going to break.
Right, but she was having that tea, and then
that's the whole
really focused on that broken cup, right?
I think I agree with the water. I wanted to mention that all the classic four elements are in this film. One of the things that we got broken away from after the 17th century was works of art which have a whole cosmology. If you go back to painting in the 17th century, Poussin, you will get all the elements in a film, in a painting. And fire, earth, wind, and water are all in this movie, and very importantly. But the greatest of these is water, because it somehow washes clean. There's and it also puts out the fire, so that you have some kind of primacy of water. But I think it's extraordinary that all the elements, if you go, just as all these homages to film history, this is a very complete film universe, where it takes a moment in time and it observes certain unities. It all takes place in 1 year in Mexico. And it was the pivotal year, as I told you in the introduction, because that all-important massacre of the students on June 10th of 1971, which was, and then the difficulty dealing with what that meant in Mexican history has been a very defining moment about the corruption they're still trying to get past. And so I feel like we're looking at a film that has a self. You see, when you have that much history, that much cosmology, that many social classes, that kind of theme of different consciousness, you're looking at a self. And it's as if the movie is saying, the self is ultimately in support of matriarchal consciousness now. It's not just a stage in consciousness to get beyond, but it's actually an enduring and important survival. This is a survival ego. This would enable us to survive. And I think that's quite a thing for a film to assert, which has that much going for it. It actually has a point. And I think when we realize the self in our analyses in our lives, it usually has a point to make. It certainly is pointing us in a certain direction. It's not just a static mandala that could be anything. Anything could be anything. It's not like that at all. When the self is constellated, you get a sense of direction.
Yes, and there's just one other famous last words. There's just one other image that I found extraordinarily powerful, and that is after the beach scene, the mother's driving everybody home, and everybody's kind of looking out the window, kind of little eyes glazed over. We see the boy and the girl and so on. And then we see Cleo, okay? And she's holding on to two kids, and you see her face, and there's kind of a beatific smile there. And you see the reflection off the glass window of trees and the clouds.
The skies.
I mean, talk about jaw-dropping scenes.
Yes.
I mean, that's it for me. I mean, I think this ties in with what you say, the primacy of matriarchal consciousness.
And the sky. It's the opening. It's the opening. I mean, I think for me, these texts that come out of our artists are the guides. I mean, to me, when I go to the movies, I hope to get an image of where are we all going. I mean, every night I go home and I listen to the news like all of you do, and I say, where in the world is this going? And when I see a movie like this, I have hope. I really have hope that this is where it's going, or where it wants to go at least. And I would love to see it happen, but it gives me hope that it will happen. So I offer that also.
I want to thank you for talking about matriarchal consciousness as something other than this static or what was place. But I wonder if this movie doesn't really comment on our world today.
Oh,
You know, all the splits and the healing that's possible. Maybe that's why it feels hopeful.
Well, it shows what's possible. It also shows what's also possible, such as that dreadful hospital, where it's amazing any baby got born in that hospital alive. I mean, you got that feeling that being born dead was pretty much the standard of the hospital. So that was pretty scary. So that it showed us what is. It's how much the impossible is possible right now. Yeah.
Pretty babies and religious.
But I have,
Yes, please.
It seems to me that those children almost died, in part because of the lack of mature masculinity anyway.
Right.
And they were always doing what they were told not to do, over and over again. They would-
Absolutely.
They would be told not to do something. And I just bring this up because they were told not to go out, they went out and they almost died. And I just remember my father coming home weeping one time, and I was very young, weeping and weeping. He kept saying, "You children never obey, never obey." And the reason he was saying it was that his good friend's son had drowned, because he was told not to go somewhere. And I just kept seeing in this film how the children did just whatever, but there was no one there to take on that task of drawing a boundary. And finally, they almost died. And then it seems like in the end, the women somehow integrate something that's important to keep going. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but there's no mature masculinity.
Well, and that's what of course, that's a story I meet all the time. And in a theological sense, that's the Deus absconditus, the absconded patriarchal God is missing. God has abandoned us. That was the theme in Bergman's movies. Where's God, And my feeling is that is one thing consciousness can do, is that, some of us grew up with almost no father, like myself, or the wrong kind of father when we did have one. It was a military father, popped in and undid everything I did when he was gone most of the time, and I had to undo the undoing. But aside, so some of us have found that if you have consciousness, you can survive the father, but I think that consciousness is not going to just be patriarchal. So that's probably why I chose this film. Yes, the 7 o'clock.
Thank you.